You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, and we are here in our fourth week discussing Agatha Christie's A Caribbean Mystery, as now what has become a bit of a tradition to watch some screen adaptations of Agatha Christie stories after we cover their books, because it's just such fun seeing the chaos wrought upon them by various adaptations to the screen. Doing a bit of a show and tell, I brought Joan Hickson's 1989 iteration as part of Agatha Christie's Miss Marple on the BBC, and Herds, what chaos have you wrought upon us today?
I was going to say, you say that we bring chaos to these adaptations, but I'm definitely the one bringing the chaos.
Yeah, I mean, when we did the last Marple story, Body in the Library, you brought Miss Ma Nemesis from South Korea, and that is the most chaos I've ever seen wrought in an adaptation.
Well, also in the ABC murders, when I brought the Alphabet Murders, I thought that was even more chaos.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I was going to say, that's definitely the worst thing I brought to the show, in a good way. But no, I've defied type and brought something that wasn't made more than 20 years ago. I brought the 2016 French adaptation, Albert Major Parle Trop, which means that Albert Major talks too much. It's a very strange adaptation. It's part of a series that I don't speak French, Les Petites Meurtres d'Agatha Christie, which I think is the little stories. That's my best guess. It's really fun. I like that the way that we've kind of come together here is that you've brought a safe, presumably British adaptation.
It's the BBC. It doesn't really get more on paper British, does it?
We've brought these two strange adaptations, one very safe with a few changes, and one completely different. Albert Major is set in a hospital rather than on a Caribbean island. It's sort of about relationships between characters, but not about like wives and husbands and marriages in the same way that the original is.
There's even a relationship between the detective's assistant and a homeless man who gets wrapped up in some conspiracy.
That's true. Jojo the tramp. There ain't names that they call Jojo, but let's call it tramp.
We got some aftermarket subtitles because we couldn't find the official translation, and it was
very fun trying to hunt down subtitles that would tell us what the heck was going on. I think we should probably start with the safer option to go into in depth. So you brought Joan Hickson's A Caribbean Mystery. I think it's just the same title.
Yeah, I mean, the Joan Hickson series produced by the BBC, as with the 2010s ITV Agatha Christie's Marple, are both like trying to be as faithful to the original stories as possible. They're very beat-by-beat adaptations, but there was one major type of change that they made to this iteration of the story, and we'll kind of be spoiler light for this first part of the show and go more into spoilers in the back half when we're talking about the French mystery. The major change that they made is that all of the men in the book, as they're portrayed, are, very suave and captivating, even though what they're doing is gross and awful. And the show leans into that grossness so hard. It is so much more uncomfortable than the book in a very compelling way.
We rag on Christie a bit for the casual hating on women, the casual racism that occurs. And I liked that, particularly our second victim, Victoria, is everything Christie would, casually rag on. She's a Black Islander woman servant. Like, it doesn't get more marginalized than that in a Christie novel. But the way that the BBC adaptation actually goes about portraying her is very sympathetic.
Meet her family, the local cop knows her and is a black cop.
Yes, there's a black cop involved in the story, which is
Miss
crazy.
Marple by reputation, and it's a plot point.
Apparently. But essentially, Victoria is a character now, which is nice. And when she is killed as part of the plot, there's this like spiritual wake that the characters on the island have for her to show that she mattered and to kind of allow her to pass on. And it leads to what is, in my opinion, like the best scene in the episode, where we have that setup of like, we're going to have this very wholesome spiritual wake for this person in our family, in our community who's passed on. And then we hard cut to Molly's character, who is having a really hard time just upchucking drugs, surrounded by scientists in like a sterile room. And it feels like the story is making a very clear point about how spirituality and the way that these other characters sort of view the world can be more beneficial than just cold, hard science.
And I think the other thing that's really nice about the way that we sort of draw back from science here is that, like, the medical evidence that we get is much more upfront and face value too. There's less of this waffling around, like, the incompetent doctor character. You know, obviously a tried and true trope in Golden Age murder mystery, but it doesn't do a lot for us. Whereas in this story, it gets out of the way so that we can have these scenes getting to know the characters in Barbados, where the story has been reset, and take the cultural impacts of it a bit more seriously.
And also we cut some characters, which is probably a smart move. We cut the Prescotts. So we lose our source of gossip and religious sort of authority and distribute that throughout the cast. Like, there are a number of different characters that give us the gossip that Marple needs to kind of listen to.
It doesn't, like, sideline any of the characters with the gossip. It instead lets the information come out more naturally and tells us a bit more about the characters as individuals by what information they give out. And I also did like that rather than this, like, Puritan religious character, that the religious aspect of the story is, as you say, like, taking a marginalized community seriously.
This may be heresy, but I think this adaptation might just be a straight upgrade from the original text.
Oh, I would agree.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that, because I think that they just take all the bad stuff and make it better, even if they don't fix the core plot. But all of the characters are more fleshed out. They're more important. They have an appropriate amount of screen time. Like, it's just a good adaptation, and I would recommend it over the book if you just want to check into the story.
It is an adaptation that has a very strong read of the text that it is adapting in a way that it is not apologetic for, and I think actually does a lot for the source material by focusing in on how to, like, reinterpret what I'd call problems in the original text. As you said there, the, like, ending still feels like it's a little short of foreshadowing, and the pacing's a bit weird and things get rushed through. But at the same time, I also think that there's something really interesting about that, in that it shows that the problem is, like, inherent to the text, I feel. And the same with the French version from The Little Murders of Agatha Christie. The ending of that story as well, which we'll talk about towards the end of the show, just absolutely drops the ball on a couple of plot points that make characters look unnecessarily incompetent.
They have a different set of problems there that I think comes from this. Probably, I haven't seen any other episodes, but it probably comes from the series as a whole and the detective that they've chosen. I should say, though, that in the BBC version, of course, Miss Marple doesn't have an internal monologue, which I'm sure we will have commented on this the last time we viewed her work, but I am thankful that that works, right? That all of the sort of internal decisions that Marple makes are still very clear and cohesive, and we can follow her journey.
The last time we watched the Joan Hickson adaptation, we were talking a lot about how the music sort of iterated Miss Marple's thoughts. Like, we'd have, like, wind chimes when she had a realization, where in the book it would be like her describing a turn of her head or something. Whereas in this adaptation, it was much more like themes for all of the characters that played kind of abruptly.
Oh, goodness. I remember the moment where I realized that Molly has this, like, very light feeling, carefree theme that plays. It's not just for scenes that she's in, it's specifically for when the camera is on her.
Yes, that was the weird thing, is they're having a, like, dialogue between Molly and another character, and every time the camera lands back on her, the theme plays again, and it kind of becomes a little too foreground because of the back and forth. It's very weird.
Like, it's clearly there to reinforce the fact that it's like the airhead, she might be crazy thing, like she's not all there, but also because she's a victim in the story, so it does play on both fronts, but it's so constant and so obvious.
The one really strong scene that it does have, though, is when Molly walks back into the hotel covered in blood from the second murder in the story. And in the book, it's not like it's a complete secret, but it's portrayed a bit more hushed, where in this version, her theme plays sort of more eerily and done with strings and woodwinds as she walks back in soaked in blood, surrounded by all of the patrons of the hotel. It's so unsettling.
This adaptation does over dramatize that. I think it's fun, though. Like, I don't think it's too much. It really makes you feel like she's a victim, which is kind of cool in a way. I think that in general, this adaptation does a good job of keeping the drama fraught and present and kind of over the top in that way.
Speaking of over the top, the accents. They make, is it the Dysons? They make American? And it's so overcooked in just a hilarious manner.
He's so evilly American.
It's like he walked right out of Dallas.
He did. That's where he's come from. They make him such an obvious villain as well, where he's hitting on everybody. He's hitting on every lady in the building. And so based on the themes of the story, it's like, well, clearly he's the killer. He's a predator. It's awful. But, in the way we're engaging with the themes of the original text, of course.
It's it's really good. I was just consistently impressed right up until the ending where the book does no better.
Yeah, that's really its biggest sin. I think that if it does have a biggest sin, the BBC adaptation could have taken at least one more liberty, because the closest that they get is that when we get to the final scene where we apprehend the killer, Marple gets to grab the glass of poison. It's not Jackson just doing everything, which I like. I like that Marple got to be slightly more physically present to make up for her lack of inner monologue, basically. But I think that we could have added in a chase scene or two. Unfortunately, the Little Murders, you're right, Murders is Murders, takes the idea of a chase scene and makes it in the most ludicrous way possible.
We will come back to that in just a second. This is Death of the Reader, your Murder Mystery World Tour on 2SER 107.3. We are discussing Agatha Christie's Miss Marple's A Caribbean Mystery and its screen adaptations thereof. More to come on your Murder Mystery World Tour. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex here for your Murder Mystery World Tour. And just wanted to let you know our sister program, brother program, sibling program, Final Draft here on 2SER 107.3 recently joined the Australian Community Radio Network and can be heard on community stations all around the country. But Andrew Popel reached out this week and said, Flex, I want to show off some crime fiction. I want to have some fun, sharing some good stories. And I said, I have the book for you, Andrew. So if you want to hear a little bit more of your crime fiction goodness, you can head on over to Final Draft, wherever you get your podcasts, or up on the 2SER website, and take a listen to the conversation that I had with Tim Ailiff about his latest John Bailey thriller, The Wrong Man. John Bailey is a journalist traumatized by years of the world throwing the worst at him, and his journey to recovery has been sort of the core of these books, as he is constantly embroiled in the near espionage that his past work as a journalist has embroiled him in. And it's a really, really compelling read. I had a fantastic time talking with Tim about it. One of, if not my favorite interviews of the year. So check that out on Final Draft, wherever you get your podcasts. We are going to jump back over to A Caribbean Mystery. This is Death of the Reader. Stick around. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, and we are discussing Agatha Christie's Criminal Games.
Whoa!
Specifically, the French adaptation of Agatha Christie's A Caribbean Mystery as part of the Little Murders of Agatha Christie, or Agatha Christie's Criminal Games, from 2016. This episode came out. The series kind of stretches over several years because they're like feature-length episodes. And in this one, it is not Miss Marple who is on a Caribbean island. It is Alice Avril, who has been put up in a hospital after Detective Swan's assistant just about murders her on a moped. We are going spoilers in this part of the episode, by the way, so be warned.
It's going to be fun. I don't expect that anybody listening to this will be able to find this episode to watch it, so we can spoil all we want.
We had to find a copy of the episode in French with no subtitles.
We had to fly to France.
Separately find subtitle files and try line them up manually. It was a pain.
It was good fun. But yeah, this story, because it is serialized, it has an ongoing plot. Swan Lawrence is the main detective of the show, and he works, as you say, with Alice Avril or Alice April, depending on the subtitles at the time, and Marlene Leroy. And these two women are Betty and Veronica, where, if you're not familiar with Archie comics, where he has these two girls that he likes.
I'm not.
Oh, here we go. So Betty and Veronica is a tried and true trope where there are two girls that the main character likes, one of whom is the like, I've been your best friend for 20 years and you just don't see me in that way, but I'm such a nice girl and wouldn't you like to just hang out and be best friends? And the other girl is like, I'm the hot one. I wear makeup. That's what we're looking at here. That's what Alice and Marlene are, where Alice is the Betty and Marlene is the Veronica, although they have switched their hair colors because traditionally Betty is the blonde one and Veronica is the darker haired one. Anyway, now we've got that out of the way.
So Marlene Leroy is Lawrence's secretary and
Yes.
Avril is like a journalist. And the
Yes.
setup for this one is, instead of Miss Marple running across a talkative, retired old man with too many stories, Alice meets a fellow journalist, also in hospital, who tells her of a great story that he's writing about a murderer. And just as he's telling the story, a doctor that we can't see walks away mysteriously in the background. And soon thereafter, the journalist, Albert Major, is found dead, syringe through his eyeball.
Yeah, there is no pretense of this being like an accidental high blood pressure thing in this version of the story. It is a murder from the beginning. But what you have neglected to mention is that the very first scene is a dead dog with a knife through its heart. And that's how we get our Molly stand-in, whose name I forget because it doesn't matter. We get the French Molly into the hospital by pretending that she killed the dog. She's like, I'm crazy, I killed a dog. And her husband is like, yeah, you are. You should go to this hospital that I also work at, and I'm not going to tell the head of the hospital that I'm putting you in the hospital. And this is not suspicious at all.
There was one thing in like the initial murder of Albert that I really liked that they didn't keep doing a lot through the episode. It's the puppets. The scene where Albert gets murdered is like miniaturized and the shadows are cast all weird on the wall with like shadow puppetry, and the air conditioning that gets splattered with blood is clearly a miniature. And you made the point while we were watching it, Herds, that they're clearly going for this idea that Molly is being puppeted. But they only like do it once, unless I missed it the other times?
No, I don't think they did it again. To be clear, in these scenes, the victim, when he's like shown reacting to being dead, it is clearly a person. But there's this really obvious, like there's the air conditioning unit where there's these comically large drops of blood. But also, when we see the arm with the syringe go up, the hand is way too big for the arm. It's like a wooden stick. It's a really great shot. I kind of loved it. But yeah, it's definitely a metaphor, a visual metaphor for Molly being puppeted by the real killer.
Because there are a lot of other, like, unreliable narrator sort of moments.
We see her stabbing a lot of people, but they never explain it. It's just her being lied to by her husband.
And we also see moments where, like, Swan Lawrence is, like, imagining Alice dead because after one journalist is killed, he realizes that her life is in danger, and he's, like, having fears about her succumbing to the same fate, which I thought was a kind of cute touch.
There's also a fun, quirky subplot where Alice's papers get mixed up.
I think she has cancer after a scooter accident. Why? And Marlene is like, oh, if only I hadn't crashed this scooter and given her cancer.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it works, right? You get a bump on the head, you get cancer. That's where the tumor comes from. But also, interestingly, now I do want to make this point, that we praised the previous adaptation for being very cognizant of the racial undertones of its story. And they bring Victoria back again. She's a nurse this time. But she is an incompetent nurse. She's the one responsible for giving this false cancer diagnosis. She slipped some papers into Avril's file that didn't need to be there, which is why it's totally justified that she gets murdered later, right? When she tries to blackmail Tim. And they do the same thing with the other murder victim, with Lucette, who I'm pretty sure I have to say I figured her out very quickly.
He spotted the plot hook well before it happened.
Yeah, I was very pleased. I don't often get to do this, and it's a shame I only had one witness who was completely unreliable, but no offense, Flakes. But when I saw that Lucette, every time we see this character Lucette with her hair up, I went, oh, do you think the hair is up because it's like the Roots thing in the original novel where like she's going to let her hair down so she looks like Molly? And that's exactly what it was. She had a paper bag over her head, which she's found chained to a radiator.
And they pull the bag up Scooby-Doo style, and there she is with her hair down and dead. That's not usually a Scooby-Doo thing.
No, that's not usually how that works. Usually in Scooby-Doo, everything turns out okay-ish.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed that. I was like, oh, they're having it with her hair up. So then when she has her hair down, we think that it's Molly because they've got like similar hair when their hair is down, obviously. And that was fun. But Lucette also is committing adulterous crimes. So she also is justified in being murdered, which is, I guess that might just be obviously, you know, there's stuff like that in the Caribbean mystery as well. But it is interesting, I suppose, that the two people explicitly doing bad things, because almost everyone else in this show is vindicated, even the guy who's doing hospital crimes. But the people that get killed were both karmically due for a comeuppance.
Well, yeah, because the other thing is that because it's not like hotel goers, it's either hospital patients or hospital staff. They have this weird thing where instead of it being about people's relationships and why they're away from their regular lives, it's the medical ambition of a bunch of the staff that is sort of the driving motivator, which reminds me of that episode that we really liked of Elementary, American Sherlock Holmes adaptation, that medical episode with David Harbour as the doctor. But it's portrayed really weirdly in this one where the guy is just like, yes, I'm doing illegal heart transplants on the edge of the law because I will change medicine forever. And they just kind of completely give him the green light by the end of the story where he's like succeeded in saving one dude. So they're like, yep, cool. Guess there's no ethics crimes here.
So there is some political background to this that I am not a doctor. I am not well versed in this discourse, but my understanding is that because the story is set in the 50s, where in France at the time, brain death is not recognized. So you're not allowed to transplant a heart from somebody who is brain dead but body alive. That legislation has been changed since, which is partly why he's vindicated, right? So even though in the context of the story he's committing ethics crimes, his position in terms of today's politics is actually what we follow, right? So that's why he ends up vindicated and not murdered as part of the story.
Yeah, no, like it does make sense, and they do reference that the legislation has like changed in South Africa or something towards the end of the story.
Yeah, at the time, South Africa is the only place to recognize brain death as something that can happen to somebody. So that's why the villain of the story wanted to like take all the money and move to South Africa. So
it is just interesting that like the way that they carry on that idea of these bad things that people have done that motivate them on the edge of the story in the book is like ported into this very professional standards sort of discussion.
Yeah, it's very different. It definitely has a bit more weight to it because we're explicitly dealing with life and death. It's not just a bunch of like fobby white people on a cruise or at a resort or whatever. It's like, yeah, this could have consequences.
Well, and it's also to some extent, I think, trying to contextualize the motivation of our killer, Paul, in this story, or Tim in the novel, where like he's trying to set about with his own professional ambitions, but everyone else is just having relationship trouble.
In a way, he's like above everybody else, but not above the law and you know, justice. You know, all that stuff is important too, obviously. I quite like the reframing because it's a very clean one as well. It was the sort of thing where I sat down and said, why would they move to a hospital? But then you take the like flower poison and turn it into medical poison. And yeah, you take all the married couples and turn them into hospital staff and doctors. It all fits fairly cleanly. This story is not a straight upgrade from the book, obviously, because of the different context. But I set out to kind of find a bad adaptation. But I really enjoyed this one. I really enjoyed the different take. Even though Swan Lawrence might be the biggest crime in French murder mystery history.
He is a very suave character, but there's this extremely strange aura of him
boring.
Going about like untouchable in this story. Like scenes where he's just walking through dark, unlit corridors with his lead suspect unaccompanied. And it's like, I thought this was a police procedural, not a... like, where's the backup plan here, Paul?
There isn't one. The biggest contextual change that I think kind of represents the difference between these two stories, essentially, is when we sit down, basically our two lead suspects, and because there hasn't been a lot of actual gossipy scenes, we need to play catch up with the back end of the plot. What's really going on the island of the hospital? And so Swan sits his two main suspects in a room together, and I would say that he manipulates them, but he doesn't. He just sits them there and says, I think you two are the biggest suspects. And they just go at each other's throats immediately. And through that, you were sleeping with my wife, or you aren't doing your job, but da-da-da-da-da, she deserves better. Like, they have this whole back and forth where they effectively give us all of the gossip scenes in a flurried rush of emotion between these two characters. And Swan just sits there and listens. And it's strange. It doesn't feel like he's engineering the situation the same way that Marple does. It seems like he's just happens to have two people that hate each other in the same room, and they're telling him everything he wants to know. It's a very bizarre change for him to be there and observe, I guess.
I think overall it does work, but it doesn't work in the same way where it engages with the text that the BBC version does.
Certainly not towards the end. I like its differences more than its similarities, I guess is what I would say. Although I should clarify that the final chase scene is ridiculous.
Oh, man. The fact that Marlene, finds Avril set up for death by our culprit and then just screams for 4 minutes until the men come and help her unplug a tube.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that they do the classic Bond situation setup where the villain's getting away and the heroine's in distress, but your secondary heroine, your Veronica, is in the same room as the heroine in distress. This should be a two-person job where the manly man catches the villain and the secondary girl saves main girl. That's how it should work in a plot structure sense. I'm being very basic with my terms here, but this is because this is a basic setup. But instead, what it has to be is that the villain flees into his underground Bond tunnels where he's hidden Betty so that Swan can both catch the villain and then also save the girl, even though they're in two completely separate locations. It doesn't track. It doesn't make sense unless you're doing it so that Swan can be the biggest hero that ever was.
Yeah. I still think that it shows to some extent that the ending of the original book is just structurally unsalvageable in a way that I can't entirely wrap my head around. Trying to do that, they were secretly in a relationship and now there's a deadline on these two things happening at once. It just... something hasn't worked in the way that Christie wrote that original ending that none of these were able to fix. And it's so fascinating that they try such different things and end up all three of them in the same place.
Yeah. I should also qualify. The main reason why I call this guy a Bond villain is because he also monologues his plan to the heroine as he's setting up her death trap so that she can be saved for later.
I've put in just enough to perfectly kill you.
Yes.
Which means that if there's even a drop left in the bottle, you'll be totally fine. And there's half the bottle left when they get there.
Yeah, there definitely need to be a big bomb strapped to her chest with a big cartoonish looking timer. That's what it really needed. So yeah, obviously that whole thing is partly to address the rushed ending of the original text, but it is clunky and serves Swan in a way that is kind of gross. And it doesn't quite land. Although, to be fair, they do end the episode on the whole cancer subplot where Alice takes advantage of the fact that they think she has cancer.
They think she's going to die, so she asks for a holiday and a new scooter. And
yeah. They're like, well, that's okay. We can sell all of our family heirlooms to pay for your holiday for the last 10 days of your life. But yeah, it's a big comedy bit, it's just a bit of fun, that section.
I suppose, Herds, it's time for us to dive over to our next book.
Return to Blood.
It is with great pleasure that we go over to Michael Tearawa Bennett's Return to Blood, the second novel in the Detective Hannah Westerman series after her debut in Better the Blood.
We're returning to it.
Our chapters were 1 to 11, I believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting because the first novel in the series, which I have read, was not a murder mystery in a way that I'll be very interested to see how the series has evolved, and I'm excited to see the fun challenge that you can drag through for me. in this story, because Michael's writing is always so compelling.
It's really good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how you pick it apart.
This is Death of the Reader, your murder mystery world tour here on 2SER 107.3. We'll catch you then. We're out of here.
Au revoir.